Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm your host. It's a show that where we really talk to local authors here based in the Kootenays and just find out what the motivation was behind their book and just an insight into their writing. So today we're pleased to welcome our guest, Elinor Florence. Elinor's from Invermere. Thanks for being our guest and being with us today on Talking Kootenay Books. Your book is a bird's eye view, so let's just talk a little bit about your book. This was published, what, a couple of years ago?
October 2014 it came out, and it's done very well since then. In the summer of 2016, 6 months ago, it was named one of the Canadian bestsellers, top 10 bestsellers in Canada in the Globe and Mail newspaper. So that was a big thrill for me because, of course, we live in a fairly rural part of the world, and it's a pleasure to know that people right across Canada are enjoying my book.
Well, congratulations. That is really impressive to be on the Canadian bestseller list. I remember opening up the newspaper and seeing your book there and being impressed just seeing it on the list. So that really speaks to the fact that people have enjoyed your book and so forth. So I'm impressed by the fact that you've gone out and promoted your book. Can you just tell us about how you've done that and how extensive you've been working to really promote the book and let people know about it?
Well, social media has been a great help because, you know, if we live in a small town, it's difficult to get out there to the cities really and talk to people. I have visited several cities, the main ones in Western Canada: Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Victoria. Usually try to combine my book tours with a visit that I'm making anyway, or a trip. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken at numerous book clubs. Book clubs have been a great support for me. They really enjoy reading the book. I think it's because everyone has a personal connection to World War II in some way. Mm-hmm. And dozens and dozens of book clubs have read my book.
Oh, that's interesting. So let's just talk about the book for a moment. What's the significance of A Bird's Eye View?
Well, it's about a farm girl from Saskatchewan. I grew up on a farm outside North Battleford, so my heroine, Rose, her town is called Touchwood. It's loosely based on my hometown of North Battleford. During the war, it became a British Commonwealth air training base, and so Rose is fired with patriotism herself. She joins the Royal Canadian Air Force, and she is sent over to England and becomes an interpreter of aerial photographs.
Okay, so let's talk about interpreter of aerial photographs. What does that mean? What does she do? What role did she play?
During the war, a number of reconnaissance aircraft were sent over the continent thousands of times to take film of the landscape below, and they brought this film back to one central location in England, and the aerial photographic interpreters studied these aerial photographs, and they were looking for potential bomb targets and bomb damage because they wanted to assess what the bombers had done. So they worked in cooperation with Bomber Command primarily.
So one thing that really impressed me about your book is that it appears to be very historically accurate. How did you go about doing the research?
I began by reading, of course, but I also interviewed a number of veterans, World War II veterans, because I wanted to get the feel, the authenticity of that time period correct. So I picked up on a lot of their speech patterns and included a lot of their anecdotes in my book, anecdotes that you wouldn't have found anywhere else in the history books. For example, I interviewed a female veteran in Windermere who told me that when the girls were developing photographs in the darkroom, they would strip down to their underwear if it was too hot. Mm. And so I created a scene in my book about that because I knew that nobody would ever write about that in a history book. In fact, I'm sure the men didn't even know that was taking place.
Okay, so that really shows what extent you went to with your research. You actually traveled to England and did some research there, is that correct?
I went over to England to visit Medmenham, which was the headquarters for aerial photographic interpretation. It's now a luxury hotel called Danesfield House. It's about an hour outside of London. I couldn't afford to stay there because it was very posh. George and Amal Clooney had their wedding reception there, so that gives you an idea of how fancy it is. But I did prowl around the grounds and I took photographs and I, made notes.
Okay. So your main character is named Rose. I have a feeling that there's some of Elinor in Rose. Let's just talk a little bit about that.
Well,
she worked for a newspaper,
She worked
right?
for a newspaper, which
that
is
is your
how I
background.
started my career, working for a newspaper in my hometown. I was a journalist all my life, really. Rose isn't, of course. But because she has learned to take photographs and develop her own photographs in the darkroom, that's what leads her to become a photographic interpreter.
Okay. Who published your book?
My book was published by Dundurn Press in Toronto, which is now the largest Canadian-owned publisher. I didn't know anything about Dundurn before I wrote to them and sent them a copy of my manuscript, but I knew that they were interested in Canadian history and had published a number of nonfiction titles. So I was thrilled when the first publisher I sent my manuscript to took it.
So your first book sort of spun off your second book, and I believe that's self-published. Is that correct?
Yes. I had interviewed so many veterans for my website and blog that I decided just to take 28 of my best interviews and self-publish them into a book. There are a number of people in here from this area, including Bud Abbott from Cranbrook, who is a naval pilot, Jim Ashworth from Invermere. He was a pilot over Burma during World War II, and about 10 of my veterans are still living, which is nice because, as you know, they are disappearing at an alarming rate now, and so I'm glad that I was able to interview these people before it was too late.
Right, so you captured a bit more of our history. So can you just tell me what's the difference between publishing with a publishing house and maybe self-publishing? Any observations there?
Yes, well, the big difference is that when you publish with a traditional publisher like Dundurn, your royalties are 10% roughly, which so that means you get 10% of the sale price of the book. Whereas with a self-published book, you pay the expenses yourself, but you also keep all the profits. I have to say, though, that self-publishing is quite an exhaustive journey, I think, as you know, Keith.
Yes.
I hired a designer because I didn't feel comfortable about you know, putting all the photographs in the book. There are a lot of photographs in here, including color photographs. I had it printed by a printer in Calgary. I had to pick it up myself and bring all the boxes home to my garage and sell it that way.
So it's a real commitment on your part.
It is.
It's a lot more work, as you mentioned. So congratulations on both books. Let's just explore the fact that you've spent this time and invested it in your book. What kind of satisfaction does that bring you?
Oh, it gives me a tremendous amount of satisfaction. You know, I worked as a newspaper and magazine journalist all my life, and my husband said, why is it so important to have a book published? You've probably touched a lot more people with your articles for Reader's Digest magazine, for example, which has a huge circulation. And I said, I can't explain it. There's just something about a book, isn't it, that feels like you've made a permanent mark on the world.
Right, yes. So would you mind reading an excerpt from the book? Maybe just share a brief excerpt for us.
Sure. Throughout the book, I didn't want to leave Canada behind after she went overseas, so throughout the book I have her mother and her friends writing her letters from back home in Saskatchewan, telling her what's going on in Canada on the home front during the war. So I'll just read a little excerpt from a letter that she received from her mom on August 30th, 1943. My dearest Rose, I'm sitting at the kitchen window looking at our beautiful crop. The wheat is as high as my waist and the heads so heavy they're hanging down. Your father would dearly love to buy a new combine, but farm machinery isn't being manufactured now, so he'll have to make do with the old one. I have some sad news. Harry Boyd was killed. The telegraph agent said his mother took the news quite calmly. I knew my boy wasn't coming back, she said. I shed all my tears a long time ago. Remember how she carried on when he left home? Somehow her mother's intuition knew he wouldn't survive. If she moves into town, the Boyd place will be empty. There are so many deserted farms around here. The Parker house has been boarded up. It makes me sad to drive past, remembering those twin boys, both lost at sea. Mrs. Parker gave up farming after she was nearly crushed against a stall when she was feeding the bull. The animals are making trouble for the women now that the men aren't around. One of the smart girls was thrown out of her buggy last week when her team ran away, but she was only bruised.
Wow. So I really like the descriptive nature of your writing, and it really sort of captures the scene or the essence. So I understand you have a new project that you're working on. What do we anticipate in the future?
I have signed a contract with Dundurn Press for a second novel called Wildwood. It will be published in March 2018. So the road to traditional publishing is a long and weary one. Right. So I have to wait almost a year before I see that in print. It's about a young single mother from Phoenix, Arizona, who inherits an abandoned farmhouse in the Peace River area of Alberta on condition that she lives there for 1 year. And this is an off-the-grid farmhouse with no modern conveniences, no internet, and she must teach herself the pioneer skills in order to survive.
While you've whetted our interest, it sounds exciting. We look forward to the publishing of that next book. So this has been Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. Our guest today has been Elinor Florence. Thank you for taking the time, Elinor, of being here today. And we hope you can join us again when your new book comes out.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell, and our guest today is Bill Roberts. Bill is from Kimberley. Welcome, Bill. Great to have you on Talking Kootenay Books.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here, Keith.
Bill is the author of The Best Miners in the World, Stories from Canada's Sullivan Mine. And Bill, let's just talk about your book. When was it originally published?
Well, it was originally published in 2004. At the time, the Sullivan Mine was shut down, and so prior to this book, I started interviewing miners. So it's pretty much just a chronicle of short stories, miners I gathered from the old days up to the new days.
Okay. So Bill, let me ask you, when we talk about the Sullivan Mine, let's talk about where it is and the significance of that mine.
Well, the Sullivan Mine is in Kimberley, BC. It's been going since 1898. And over that period of time, between $80 and $90 billion worth of materials as product has come out of that mine. And over 60,000 different employees have worked in that mine over that period of time. And these employees is a true, what Canada is pretty much all about. It has people from all over the world working there. If you look at one pay slip I have on there, or a page for came out of the accounting, you can see all the different countries that these people have come from.
Mm-hmm. I was impressed with that. As you go through your book, you can just sort of see the international scope
Right.
where people came from that worked at the Sullivan over the years. So you said 60,000 people you estimate have been employed at the Sullivan over the 100 years
Right.
of its history. So that's impressive. How did that affect the community, do you think?
Well, like, it was the community. That's what made the community go. There was nothing else around. Well, there was some logging going around, some cattle business, but it was the mining. It was a big thing. The guys who discovered the mine were guys from Spokane, Washington. That's where all your big investment money came from at that time. Other there in Great Britain. Mm-hmm. But the four guys who bought the mine for $24,000, I mean, no, they developed the mine, and then they sold it for $24,000. Mm. And that's probably the biggest boo-boo they'll ever make in their whole lives.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it really produced billions over the course of the lifetime of that mine. So, of course, the Sullivan closed, when did it close?
2001.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I read through your book, I just read so many personal accounts, personal stories of these miners that had basically given their life for this occupation. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about some of the colorful characters that the mine saw over the years?
I could really tell some stories about some of those guys. Well, there's guys like Hard Rock McDonald. He came up from the States. He was running what was it called, the big miners union in the States. And he came up from the States because he thought the people down there were trying to get rid of him because he was organizing the great big union, it was called at that time. And so he tried to organize down there, so he knew there were people out hunting for him, so he came to Canada to get away from these mine police people.
So he worked at the mine, did he?
Yeah, he worked at the mine. He called him Hard Rock McDonald. When he put his hard hat on, he took the liner out, and so the hat would be down around here. That's how he worked. Mm-hmm. And he, when he went in the beer parlor, he'd order. Well, them days it was 10-cent glasses, so he had little glasses, and he'd only drink half of it, and he'd leave half on there. Mm. And he'd come to work. He'd have a whole package of meat. Like, you know, instead of slices, you know, you could take slices and make out a sandwich. Yeah. The whole package would be his bucket. That would be his sandwich. Yeah, he was quite a character. He's a good man. He's a barman. Barmen were probably, they had the most hazardous job in the mine. Mm-hmm. They'd have to go up and bar big slabs down, and we lost a lot of barmen over the years doing that.
So I think I read in your book somewhere that 70 people were
73
killed in the Sullivan over the course of its history?
73 miners, yeah. If you count, there's 74 in there, because my wife made me put one extra guy in there because she felt really bad for this gentleman. He was an old... I have all the original mine inspector reports, so everybody's perished in this mine and how they died from 1907 to the present. Well, this one guy, he's an older man. They had him a job outside the main portal where the trains come out from underground. Mm-hmm. He was sweeping the track, getting the snow off, and the doors flew open, the train ran over and killed him. Mm. And according to the mine inspector report, he lost his life because he was old and deaf. Okay. That's how they wrote it in the book.
Well, it's nice that you included that.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a tribute to those that have worked in the mine. So how long did you work at the Sullivan?
I worked in the mine 36 years.
And you had many experiences, obviously met many miners over the years. Mm-hmm. What motivated you to take those experiences, put them down in writing?
Well, probably because I lost my partner underground, Mike Liza Herka. He got caught by a large slab, and so that stayed with me for a long time. It was a long time, and then we lost another person too, Stu. Yeah, lost him. So things like that, they ride on you after a while. But to me, it was like a therapy when I wrote my book.
Right. So let's just talk about the writing process. How long did it take you to put everything down and get it to the stage where you wanted to publish it? Well,
I started taping the stories probably 8 years prior to my retirement. Mm-hmm. And once I retired, I went right after it. And at the time, it filled a niche at Kimberley. Most of the guys were dying. So they kept a couple of guys who were still alive. They said, "Bill, you got to hurry up and get this book out, because we're all going to be dead." Mm-hmm. So I self-published it, but I had a lot of help. I had a person who wrote a book, mm-hmm. who was my distributor, Sandhill distributor in Kelowna. She wrote a book in self-publishing, and she gave me all the help I needed. Mm-hmm. So we got the book out, and I asked, I had it all down. I said, "Well, how am I going to finance this to write this book?" So I went and talked to a couple other authors, and they said pre-sales. Mm. I said, "Pre-sales? That'll pay for my book, eh?" Okay, so I went out and pre-sold. I had 800 books sold before I even had one sold, because the people of Kimberley needed the book at that time because the mine was shutting down, eh?
Right. So it's a real tribute and a history of the Sullivan. Bill, you still have a connection to the mining industry. What do you do in the summertime?
In the summertime, I put on mining shows at the Interpretive Center in Kimberley. Mm-hmm. In the last few years, we've been getting around 10,000 people a year come through. I put on mining shows. I talk about mine rescue. I show people how mining is done. And we have an old powerhouse there. We have 10 compressors in there, and they're all over 120 years old. We have this big Pelton water wheel that came from Moyer mine, and we turn that on.
So what is the reaction of people when they come into the mining center, the interpretive center there? Do they have any awareness of what mining is all about?
Most of them don't. Mm-hmm. No, I always ask if there's any miners there, because if there is, I got to watch how I tell the story. Eh?
So, not only does your book have an insight into the miners and the people, it also gives us sort of an insight into the industry, mm-hmm. and the significance of the Sullivan to our region for so many years.
It's huge, like like the trains used to come through Cranbrook to go on their way to Trail. You know, there's a lot of ore went through this town in that time. You know, it was quite a place. God, you know, if I could do it again, I'd do it again. It was the greatest job in the world as far as I was concerned. But I worked with a man who, well, he's in the book here, Red Foster, and he had the oldest blasting ticket in Canada. Mm. And he was talking about, he says, remember, he says, I started blasting, we used black powder, Bill. Mm. And I said, God, really? Mm. And he says, remember those Zeppelin blinds we used to have? And I said, what do you mean Zeppelin blinds? He said, remember when the Germans used to come over in the Zeppelins and drop bombs in our place? He said, you don't remember them? And I said, how old do you think I am, Red? You know? He was quite a character, Red, yeah.
So again, a reflection of those colorful characters that we see in the Kootenays. Yeah. So Bill, let's just wrap it up. I know that you've got a lot of history in this book, and you've documented the history of the Sullivan Mine. What's been the reaction? It's been out for quite some time. You know, is it just people in the Kootenays that are interested in your book, or do you have interest all over?
No, it's gone into its 5th printing.
Okay.
And so, which I never expected it'd ever go like that. I thought it'd be like a local interest book, but when you want to push your book, you know, I sent it to every news agency and every TV and radio station all across Canada, hopefully that they would, you know, give me a little glib and say, yeah, we read your book and it's good or something like that. But anytime there's a mine disaster after that, I was getting phone calls from back east even, because I didn't realize they put this book in their archives. And all of a sudden, I'm the go-to guy. Right. And they said, well, let's get a hold of this Roberts guy. And like the mining disaster in Chile, CBC asked me if I would do a national talk about it nationally about what's going on down there and what was it going to be expected of with the Chilean miners. And it wasn't good for those boys. It was really bad on them, really bad. Still is bad for them.
Yeah. Well, mining is a dangerous occupation. There's no question about it, but it has also supported a lot of communities over the years.
It has, yeah. You just look this whole area, you know, through the Crow's Nest Pass, and, you know, a lot of people get employed by mining. Right. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bill. We appreciate you coming in and being our guest on Talking Kootenay Books today.
Enjoyed it.
And your book is certainly a glimpse into history.
Yeah, it's a good little book.
And the best miners in the world, without question. And before we just wrap up, I just wanted to go with one other point here. I think that technology that was found in the Sullivan has been sort of exported to a lot of mines in Western Canada, in fact, all over North America.
All over the world, actually. Yeah, yeah. How to separate your minerals from you know, the stuff they don't want, and that it's an awful lot. The tech. It's probably, well, like it's the premier of BC said it's probably the prime mining company we've ever had in British Columbia. It's Teck. Right. Well, it was Cominco at that time, and prior to that was Consolidated Mining and Smelting.
Right. So the book is The Best Miners in the World.
Best Miners in the World.
The author is Bill Roberts. And thank you for joining us on Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell.